Judge Richard Holloway sat comfortably in his high-backed leather chair, a smug grin creeping across his face. In the crowded courtroom, an elderly veteran, James Callahan, stood before him, his frail hands gripping the edge of the podium for support. The judge's laughter echoed through the chamber as he mocked the old soldier's trembling voice and worn-out uniform. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. No one dared to challenge the man in the black robe until 5 minutes later, when the doors burst open. FBI agents stormed in, their voices sharp and authoritative. The once powerful judge barely had time to react before he found himself in handcuffs, his arrogance replaced with stunned silence. Little did he know, his fate had been sealed long before he ever set foot in that courtroom. As the FBI agents closed in, the once commanding presence of Judge Richard Holloway shrank beneath the weight of their unwavering authority. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The very same people who had moments ago sat in stunned silence now leaned forward, eyes wide, breath held. James Callahan, the elderly veteran, remained standing at the podium, his frail frame appearing even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. Yet, there was no gloating in his eyes, no satisfaction in seeing the judge humiliated. There was only a quiet understanding, the kind that comes from decades of witnessing power corrupt men beyond redemption. One of the FBI agents, a tall woman with sharp blue eyes, stepped forward. "Richard Holloway, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit bribery," she declared, her voice cutting through the thick silence like a blade. The judge's mouth opened, then closed. His hands, which once rapped the gavel with unquestioned authority, now trembled at his sides. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am?" His voice cracked, his arrogance slipping into desperation. The agent didn't flinch. "Yes, and that's exactly why we're here." A low murmur swept through the spectators. Some exchanged knowing glances. Others stared in open shock. It was no secret that Holloway had long wielded his power for personal gain, siding with the wealthy, bending the law for the influential, and, in moments like today, using his bench as a platform for cruelty. But no one had expected justice to come so swiftly. As the agent secured his wrists in cold metal cuffs, Judge Holloway's gaze darted wildly around the courtroom, as if searching for an ally. His eyes landed on James Callahan, the man he had ridiculed mere moments ago. For a fleeting second, something passed between them, recognition, perhaps even regret. But Callahan simply watched, his weathered face unreadable. Then, with quiet dignity, he straightened his spine and saluted. The room fell utterly silent. Even the FBI agents, hardened by years of chasing criminals, paused at the sight of the old soldier paying his respects, not to the man being led away in disgrace, but to the justice that had finally caught up with him. And as Judge Holloway was escorted through the courtroom doors, his world crumbling around him, James Callahan took a deep breath and turned his gaze toward the future. A future where justice wasn't just a word spoken in courtrooms, but a promise fulfilled. As the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind the FBI agents, the tension in the courtroom remained thick. The murmurs grew louder, a mixture of astonishment and hushed conversations about what had just transpired. James Callahan exhaled slowly, his frail shoulders sinking slightly. He had seen many things in his lifetime: war, loss, injustice, but this moment felt different. It wasn't a victory, nor was it revenge. It was something deeper, something long overdue. A young reporter, barely out of journalism school, fumbled to get her camera in focus. "Mr. Callahan," she called out, stepping forward hesitantly. "Did you know this was going to happen? Did you report Judge Holloway?" The old veteran turned his weary eyes toward her. "I didn't have to," he said simply. "The truth has a way of catching up with people, no matter how long it takes." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, even the courtroom staff, clerks, lawyers, and onlookers, seemed to reflect on them. As Callahan reached for his cane and turned to leave, a man in a crisp navy blue suit stepped forward. He was in his late 40s, with graying hair and a presence that commanded respect. "Mr. Callahan," the man said, extending a hand. "My name is Andrew Carter. I'm with the Department of Justice." The veteran looked at the outstretched hand for a moment before shaking it. "Another man of the law," he remarked. "What can I do for you, Mr. Carter?" The prosecutor hesitated before speaking, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've spent years investigating corruption in our judicial system, and Judge Holloway was a key piece of the puzzle. But there are others, men like him, men who thought they were untouchable." Callahan gave a small nod. "There always are." Carter glanced around the room, then leaned in slightly. "We could use your help, Mr. Callahan. You've seen this system from both sides, as a citizen, as a soldier, and as someone who stood before a corrupt judge. Your testimony could make a real difference." The old veteran studied him, his sharp eyes searching for any hint of dishonesty. He had spent decades learning how to read people, the way their eyes shifted when they lied, the tension in their jaw when they withheld the truth. But Andrew Carter stood firm. He was serious. Callahan sighed, adjusting his grip on his cane. "I've fought in wars, son," he said. "Wars where the enemy wore uniforms. This is different." Carter nodded. "It is, but the stakes are just as high." For the first time that day, Callahan allowed himself a small smile. "Then I suppose it's time to fight one more battle." The prosecutor's eyes lit up with respect. "Then let's get to work." As they walked out of the courtroom together, the whispers behind them grew. The fall of Judge Holloway was only the beginning. And James Callahan, a man who had once thought his days of fighting for justice were long behind him, had just stepped onto a new battlefield, one where the enemy wasn't on foreign soil, but right at home. James Callahan stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp autumn air, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his aging shoulders. He had expected nothing from today's hearing, just another humiliating encounter with a system that had long since stopped serving men like him. But fate had other plans. Beside him, Andrew Carter matched his pace, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. The prosecutor's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. "Looks like Holloway's already trying to cut a deal," he muttered. Callahan chuckled dryly. "Cowards like him always do. When they're the ones with the gavel, they act untouchable. But the second the tables turn," he shook his head, "they fold like a bad hand of poker." Carter pocketed his phone. "He's naming names." That gave the veteran pause. He turned his head slightly. "And are those names worth something?" The prosecutor hesitated. "If he's telling the truth, yes. if he's trying to save himself by throwing others under the bus. Maybe. Either way, we need to verify. Callahan sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. You know, son, I never thought I'd get involved in another fight like this. But seeing what happened in there today, he exhaled sharply. I can't just walk away. Carter nodded, as if he had expected that answer. Then let's take a drive. There's someone I want you to meet. They drove through the heart of the city, past towering glass buildings and forgotten alleys, until they pulled up in front of a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a dim glow over the peeling white paint. Callahan took a moment to observe the house. Who lives here? A man who knows more than he lets on, Carter replied. A retired journalist named Thomas Grayson. Used to write exposés on government corruption before he mysteriously faded into obscurity. The veteran smirked. Mysteriously, huh? Let me guess, Holloway? Carter nodded. And the people he worked for. They climbed the steps and Carter knocked. A moment later, the door creaked open just enough for a wary blue eye to peek through. Then the door swung wider, revealing an older man with a grizzled beard and tired eyes. You're late, Grayson muttered, stepping aside. Carter raised an eyebrow. I didn't say we were coming. The journalist gave a knowing smirk. Didn't have to. After what happened in court today, I figured it was only a matter of time before you came knocking. His gaze shifted to Callahan. And you? I remember your case. Callahan stiffened. That's so? Grayson nodded, leading them into a small living room cluttered with stacks of old newspapers and case files. You weren't the first, and you sure as hell weren't the last. Holloway was just one piece of the puzzle. He tapped a thick folder on the coffee table. There's more. Callahan exchanged a glance with Carter before reaching for the folder. Inside were names, dozens of them. Judges, attorneys, politicians. Some crossed out, others circled. At the bottom of the list, 2 words sent a chill through his spine. The Sentinel Order. Callahan looked up. Who are they? Grayson sighed, rubbing his temples. They're the ones who made Holloway untouchable. A network of elites who think they own the system. He met Callahan's gaze. And if you're serious about this fight, you just stepped into something bigger than you ever imagined. The room fell silent. The weight of the truth settled between them like an unspoken challenge. Callahan clenched his jaw, his old soldier instincts kicking in. He had fought against enemies he could see. This time, the battlefield was different. But one thing remained the same. He wasn't about to back down. Then let's bring them down, he said. Grayson and Carter exchanged a knowing glance. The war was just beginning. A heavy silence filled the room as James Callahan, Andrew Carter, and Thomas Grayson stared at the names on the list. The Sentinel Order, a secret network of powerful elites who had protected corrupt judges like Holloway for years. Callahan exhaled sharply. If Holloway was just a pawn, then who's the king? Grayson tapped a name at the top of the list. William Harrington. Carter's eyes darkened. Harrington? The former Attorney General. The very same, Grayson confirmed. He's the one who built this system. For decades, he put men like Holloway on the bench, making sure they served the right people and silenced the wrong ones. Every major corruption case that mysteriously disappeared, every whistleblower whose career was ruined, It all leads back to him. Callahan studied the name, his fingers tightening around the folder. So how do we take him down? Carter pulled out his phone. We already have Holloway talking. If we can connect his testimony to the money trails Grayson uncovered, we can build a federal case against Harrington. But it won't be easy. Grayson leaned back, rubbing his temple. It's worse than that. Harrington knows how to make people disappear. Callahan smirked. Son, I've been through wars. He can try. Carter nodded. Then we move fast. We take this straight to the Department of Justice before Harrington realizes we're onto him. Grayson hesitated. You don't get it. The DOJ is compromised. Harrington still has allies in power. If you take this through the usual channels, it'll disappear. Carter frowned. Then what do you suggest? Grayson pulled out an old flip phone and placed it on the table. There's one reporter I still trust. Anna Reynolds. She's been investigating the Sentinel Order for years, but her sources always went silent before she could publish anything. He met Callahan's gaze. She needs a witness, someone untouchable, someone like you. Callahan scoffed. I'm not untouchable. Grayson smirked. No, but you're a veteran, a war hero. If they come after you now, after what happened in court today, it'll only prove everything we're about to expose. The room was quiet as the weight of the decision settled in. Finally, Callahan nodded. Get me in touch with Reynolds. 2 days later, James Callahan sat in front of a camera in a dimly lit newsroom. Anna Reynolds, a sharp-eyed reporter with a reputation for exposing the truth, adjusted her microphone. We're live in 30 seconds, the producer announced. Carter stood nearby, arms crossed. Grayson was off camera, scanning every shadow for signs of danger. They all knew what was at stake. Reynolds leaned in. Are you ready, Mr. Callahan? The old soldier took a deep breath. He had faced bullets, bombs, and battles in foreign lands. But tonight, he was fighting for his country in a different way. I'm ready. The red light blinked on. Good evening, America, Reynolds began. Tonight, we bring you an exclusive interview that will shake the foundations of our justice system. A brave veteran has come forward with evidence of corruption reaching the highest levels of power. And he's ready to name names. Callahan straightened in his chair. His voice was steady, his words deliberate. My name is James Callahan, and this is the truth. As he spoke, the world listened. And the walls of the Sentinel Order began to crumble. The fallout was swift. Within 48 hours of the interview, the FBI launched multiple raids, uncovering years of hidden transactions, bribery, and conspiracy. William Harrington was arrested, his empire collapsing under the weight of the truth. Andrew Carter led the federal prosecution, ensuring that every name on the list faced justice. Thomas Grayson, no longer living in the shadows, helped expose the full depth of the corruption. And James Callahan? He became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that one voice, no matter how old or weary, could still make a difference. As he stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching as justice finally prevailed, he tipped his hat to the sky. For the ones who never got their day in court, he whispered. And then, with quiet dignity, he walked away, not as a victim, but as a man who had fought his last battle and won.